Welcome, and very warm greetings to you all. Thank you for joining us again for another Pariyatti Presents event. My name is Briha Sarathi, and I'm here on behalf of Pariyatti as its Executive Director. We're grateful that you've all joined us today. For those of you who are not already familiar with Pariyatti, we're a non-profit charitable organization based in the USA. Our mission is to enrich the world by disseminating the words of the Buddha, providing sustenance for the seeker's journey, and illuminating the meditator's path. Pariyatti imports books from around the world, reprints books and publishes new titles, and converts existing material into digital formats. We protect and provide an enormous catalog of Dhamma resources in many languages and formats that otherwise would not be as easily available. We offer many free services, such as the Pariyatti Learning Center, Treasures of Pariyatti, and daily words for inspiration via email, RSS feeds, and our mobile app. We offer most audio and video material, as well as many ebooks and audiobooks free of charge, including a large number of resources for students of SN Goenka. We also organize donation-based residential Pali workshops and facilitate pilgrimages for Vipassana meditators. For more information on Pariyatti, please visit our website at pariyatti.org. That is PARIYATTI.org. Please note that in order to ensure a seamless experience for our audience, we've chosen to pre-record this interview with Dr. Paul Fleischman. For today's session, there will not be a live question and answer session. Instead, we will collect questions during the session and save them for our event next week. So please feel free to send your questions via the chat feature in Zoom and send them to the user named Send Questions Here. So for those of you who are not already familiar with Dr. Fleischman, he is a retired psychiatrist, an author, and a Vipassana teacher appointed by SN Goenka, specifically for presenting Vipassana to Western audiences using scientific concepts. Dr. Fleischman obtained his MD in 1971 and trained in psychiatry at the Yale School of Medicine, where he also served as chief resident of psychiatry. He was a psychiatric consultant to numerous hospitals and clinics and lectured at conferences, universities, and institutions throughout the Americas, Europe, and Asia. His many Pariyatti publications include Cultivating Inner Peace, Karma and Chaos, Vipassana Meditation in the Scientific Worldview, etc. Now retired from a more than 30-year private psychiatry practice, he lives in rural New England with his wife, Susan, who is also a Vipassana teacher in the tradition of SN Goenka. Dr. Fleischman's talks and articles are addressed to students looking for clarification about Vipassana's logic, utility, and psychological, biological, and spiritual effects. So today, Paul is interviewed by Kory Goldberg. Kory has a PhD in religious studies from the University of Quebec in Montreal and teaches ethics, critical thinking, religion, and sustainability at Champlain College in Saint-Lambert, Quebec. He co-authored Along the Path, The Meditator's Guide to Pilgrimage in the Buddha's Land, and is a general editor of the Pariyatti Journal, as well as a Vipassana teacher in the tradition of SN Goenka. So without further ado, I give you Paul and Kory.
Welcome everyone to the fourth session in our ongoing series, exploring Paul's latest book, The Power of Small Changes, Vipassana Meditation through the Lens of Biology, Psychology, and Culture. This book brings together a curated collection of Paul's introductory and old student talks, university lectures, and essays. The purpose of this series is to further explore, clarify, and deepen our understanding of the key themes presented in the book. In the first two sessions, we discussed the psychosocial and neurobiological aspects of Vipassana meditation. In the third and fourth sessions, we covered topics such as building a sustainable daily practice, cultivating ethical and healthy skepticism, and sustaining practice through times of crisis and confusion. In these final two sessions, we'll turn our attention to the topic of psychological safety in meditation. Today's session will run a little longer than usual, and we won't be taking questions after the interview. However, we'll dedicate time in the next session for audience questions, so please feel free to send them in and we'll try to get to them next time. And if you do submit a question, we kindly ask that you keep it focused on the topic at hand to help keep the discussion clear and on track. Okay, So we'll start with asking questions around understanding misconceptions and criteria for courses. So, Paul, you open your essay explaining that you wish to dispel two major misperceptions. First, that the Buddha taught meditation to anyone who desired to learn. And second, that meditation causes specific types of mental illness. So let's begin with this first misperception. So, can you please explain why you think not everybody has the capacity to sit through a 10-day residential meditation course?
There are two reasons why I have that opinion. First is, it's true. That is to say, as we ran course after course, thousands of courses in many different countries across the decades, we found that there are people who don't flourish in these courses, who don't like them, who don't want to continue with them, and who want to leave. And that was a signal to our tradition that we should help people understand more clearly before a course begins whether it's likely to be something they're looking for and want, or whether it's likely to be something that they don't want. So empirical evidence is the first. But the second is looking into the suttas of the Buddha. Now, our tradition has a particular relationship to the suttas. Goenkaji felt that simply reading suttas and getting ideas about the Buddha should not influence our tradition. We've already had experts read the suttas, live their life in authoritative relationship to the suttas as Pali scholars, and who reached certain conclusions. It's obvious that if anybody reads an ancient text, there's different opinions that can arise from that text, and there's no way of authoritatively answering what's correct or true with something that's written in a language so ancient in a time so long ago and with no living people from the time the text was written who can tell us what it meant. So the idea of just simply reading texts and changing the tradition was something Goenkaji rejected. At the same time, the suttas are the closest thing we have to the actual historical teaching of the Buddha, and many times they clue us into something. So when the question came up, well, look, we have modern students today who don't like the courses, who don't flourish in them, and we should be helping them ahead of time know that this might not be for them. The challenge to me was given, well, the Buddha always taught everyone he had full compassion for all suffering beings, and any time a person was in distress and came to the Buddha gave them the full teaching of Shila, Samadhi, and Panya, that is, the practice as it's practiced more or less today. Now, I looked into the suttas and found that that was very untrue. That is to say, there are many cases, I want to emphasize the word many, many cases in the suttas where people would approach the Buddha looking for help, looking for wisdom, looking for the path of Dhamma, and he would give them one limited component of the path. For example, some people he might emphasize Shila. Other people he might emphasize the idea of having faith in the value of Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. Other people he might teach those two components, but not any meditation component. And the texts explicitly state that the Buddha looked into the minds of his students and taught them according to what he saw was going on in their mind. That is to say, he was doing what every good teacher does. He was tailoring his teaching to the capacities of his students, to what they were coming to get, to what they were able to benefit from. The one big problem these texts present for us is we can't read our students' minds as the legends say the Buddha could do. So instead of being able to read our students' minds, we need to use the regular, ordinary, mundane methods of finding out what people are able to do by interviewing them, getting them to tell us about themselves on either on paper or on the emails as they apply. So we need a procedure that fits the modern world and our world, but we do need to have a procedure, just like the Buddha have, to screen students and help them decide what they actually are looking for. And some people are not actually looking for Vipassana. We should help them know that ahead of time, and they should tell us what they're looking for ahead of time so we can properly cue them in.
Okay, thank you. So that's why it's really not for everybody. That's why the courses are not for everybody. Yeah.
Courses are not for everybody. They were not designed for everybody.
Yeah. Good. And then the second misperception is about the belief that meditation causes specific types of mental illness. And in different parts of your essay, you criticize the notion that meditation causes very specific, unique mental health problems. And in your words, open quote, there is no medical diagnosis called meditation illness, close quote. So, what are the implications of this statement for understanding psychological challenges that may arise during or even after a 10-day meditation course, particularly considering the common psychological and psychiatric disorders already prevalent in the general population?
Okay, so every human being is vulnerable. That's one way of stating the Buddha's teaching of dukkha. Dukkha is sometimes translated as suffering, and that's a good enough translation. But we could say vulnerability. Every human being is vulnerable. Every human being will get sick and die. And these problems follow us through life. And that's part of what brings us to the Dhamma, and that's part of what the Buddha was teaching. So one of the sets of problems that people have are physical illness, and almost everybody's aware that this can affect them and accepts that this can be a challenge for them. But our current social system tends to downplay or silence or ignore or put on a back shelf the idea that every human being has psychological vulnerabilities, just like everybody has physical vulnerabilities. So every human being has more or less different degrees of ability to cope with different kinds of challenges. Some people may be excellent at dealing with the first kind of challenge and not with the second kind of challenge, and somebody else has the opposite strengths and vulnerabilities. If we look at human populations in large numbers, like, say, the population of the United States or the population of any other country, we find that there are vast numbers of people walking around with actively troubling psychological states of mind that get categorized into the names of the illnesses, the names that are used by people like psychiatrists and psychologists to categorize these illnesses. Whether you accept the categories or not, the fact is many people are in acute distress on any day that you pick. There was a study done many, many years ago in New York City, kind of study you can't do today, where in a more trusting world, people were stopped on the street corner and interviewed. Today, of course, no one would answer such an interview from someone on the street corner. But in those trusting days, people were asked, how do you feel? Are you upset? Are you stressed? How did you sleep last night? And a remarkable number of people on the street corners, this was done in Manhattan, a remarkable number of people were in a state of acute distress just when they're interviewed by a random moment in their life. So we have large numbers of people suffering from anxiety disorder every day. By large numbers, we're talking about tens of millions of people in the United States right now, as we have this interview, are anxious enough that it's hindering their quality of life, and their ability to live. We have tens of millions of people who are suffering from depression every day in the United States. We have millions of people taking antidepressants, millions of people taking anti-anxiety agents. So if you open your doors to the world and say, come and take a meditation course, and then after the course is over, you find out some people are suffering from anxiety or depression, you're not finding out anything at all. You're merely saying that before and after a meditation course, people suffer from anxiety and depression. If you imagine, and it is an imaginative idea, that meditation causes specific harm to people, you'd have to show that there are more people emerging from the meditation course, anxious, depressed, or with some other problem, dissociation, schizophrenia, bipolar. Does meditation cause these or increase these? There's no evidence. And the studies that are used to claim that meditation causes harm are studies that are based upon people writing in and saying, after the course, I felt this problem. But there is no measure of what people feel before the course. After a course, there are many cases of people being people and having the same problems of people. But there's absolutely never been a study, there's absolutely no evidence that meditation directly causes any harm at all. There's certainly no evidence that the problems people have after a meditation course are unique problems, different than the common things that we all might suffer from, like anxiety, depression, depersonalization, schizophrenia, bipolar, etc.
That's helpful. Thank you, Paul. Maybe you can help the audience understand some of these basic terms, because anxiety, the term, for example, the term anxiety just gets thrown around. Can you provide a basic explanation of anxiety?
Sure. So anxiety is a normal, healthy feature of mammal life, and we're mammals who feel anxiety as a helpful tool. If you're crossing the street in downtown New York or in Mumbai, you should be anxious. If you're looking at your financial statement at the end of the year as you're making up your taxes, maybe you should be anxious. If you're thinking of doing something very wonderful and very good, for example, like getting married, you probably should be anxious. If you're thinking of another wonderful thing, like having a child or a second child, you probably should be anxious. Anxiety is a signal we have that tells us to be more alert, think more clearly, plan more carefully, be aware, more intensely aware. But an anxiety disorder is different than anxiety. Anxiety is a useful mental state that comes and goes that helps us live. But anxiety disorder is misplaced anxiety. For example, you're anxious all day, every day. Whether good things, bad things, or nothing is happening, you feel anxious. That's an extremely distressing way to live. Some people's body and mind have lost the ability to shut off anxiety. That may come about due to a genetic defect, but more likely it comes about through environmental circumstances in which a person has been triggered to be so alert, so aware, so ready to fear, so conditioned to be fearful that their alarm signal is going all the time. It's like a person living in a war zone, a person living in a very dangerous environment, a person living in a state of economic destitution, a person living with a domestic partner that's unreliable. These kind of things will trigger an anxiety disorder. And lesser things can trigger a lesser anxiety disorder. Another kind of anxiety disorder is the kind where a person is not necessarily more anxious than is useful or helpful in the course of a day, but when a particular problem comes up, they become panicky. Panic is also a healthy, normal thing to feel. After all, if we were mammals evolving in Africa and we saw a lion or a tiger, we should probably feel a state of panic. That is extreme anxiety and wariness, a sense of threat to our survival, and a need to plan instant ways to escape. But if you feel panicked because you're giving a public talk and no one in the public talk is going to leap up and claw you to death or eat your left leg, then panic anxiety is a maladaptive trait to have when you're giving a public talk. There, the person is not particularly generally anxious, but they have a specific maladaptive anxiety. If we continue this conversation, we find different modes of being anxious, different intensities of being anxious, different situations that modulate or stimulate it. But a person trapped in extreme anxiety may not be able to sit down, close their eyes, and meditate. They may simply be too anxious. So they need treatment or help in dealing with their anxiety disorder before they come to a meditation course.
Thank you. And what about depression versus a depressive disorder?
Okay. So depression, again, is a normal, healthy human response to certain circumstances in life. Depression is a way of shutting down, withdrawing, taking time away from active coping. It helps people do things, for example, like grieve. When someone in the family dies, you don't want to go to a baseball game that afternoon and cheer for your local team. You want to spend time with feelings that don't feel good, but that you need to process. So a certain amount of depression is an adaptive way of digesting some of the difficulties we face in life. But a depressive disorder is when the depressed mood that should last an hour or a day or a week becomes fixed. The person can't escape from depression. It's marked by several features. One is feeling chronically bad. Who wants to live that way? But the other thing is inability to cope. The person whose depressed mood becomes a depressed disorder is withdrawn, unable to cope, unable to face the day, day after day. And difficult things need solution. There's something that may have to be done in that person's life, like going to work or like taking care of your kids. So if you're too depressed to meet the demands of life, the depressed mood is now called a depressive disorder. Depression is generally divided into two kinds. There's a minor depression. Probably every human being who's ever lived has had some case of minor depression where they stay depressed longer than necessary. It is a disorder. They do feel bad, but it's not incapacitating. They'll come out of it on their own or with some verbal or chemical treatment. They'll come out of it a little quicker. A major depression is one that's more severe, more crippling, lasts longer, makes the person feel much more severely worse. These are typically not experienced by most people and are a severe state experienced by some people. Nevertheless, major depression is relatively common. It's found in every civilization of the world, typically doesn't clear up on its own, requires some active treatment, and it can lead to severe incapacitation. So a very depressed person who has the fantasy that a meditation course will make them feel better can arrive at a meditation course, but be so depressed that they're incapacitated to follow the directions, follow the instructions, give a trial to this part of the early part of the technique of Anapana, give a trial to Vipassana. They may be unable to bring to bear in their mind what is necessary to do in order to meditate. So that would be an example of another person who would be wisely advised, well, don't come to a meditation course now. Wait until your treatment helps your major depression lift off, and then maybe you can try then.
Good. And what about PTSD?
PTSD is both one of the oldest and one of the newest psychiatric diagnoses. PTSD stands for post-traumatic stress disorder. It officially became a diagnosis in the 1970s, but as it was being formulated as a diagnosis, historians of mental illness were looking back and finding references to PTSD throughout human history. For example, Greek soldiers in ancient Greece were noted to have difficulties following combat, which, when described by the ancient writers, sound exactly like soldiers coming home from modern warfare who face difficulties emotionally because of the terrible feelings that warfare stirred up within them. Post-traumatic stress disorder is now recognized to have many causes, not just warfare, and to exist in every culture in the world. In our culture today, PTSD is often caused by military combat. It's often caused by crime and violence in neighborhoods. It's often caused by domestic problems and family problems where children or others in the home don't get proper care or comfort from those around them, instead are harmed or upset by those around them. The symptoms of PTSD are a little more complicated to describe than anxiety and depression because they're various. Some people with PTSD will have a different symptom profile than other people, but we can say in general it means people who are very wary and frightened all the time or too much of the time, people who have trigger states, that is, a certain particular common event may throw them into a state of extreme distress, even though the triggering event won't throw the rest of us into distress. An example I had, and many people have heard about, a soldier who's been in combat, who is suffering from post-combat PTSD, may hear an airplane fly over. In my house here, unfortunately, we have airplanes flying over many times a day. I don't really notice that. I've learned to not attend to that. But the person with PTSD may feel a state of terror. The person with PTSD is not irrational. They may know airplanes flying over Massachusetts does not mean I'm in danger. It just means they're airplanes. But they may feel their heart rate increase, their mind become extremely panicky, their blood pressure go up because they go into a state of extreme distress based upon a history of airplanes flying over, meaning many people are about to be killed. So PTSD also includes all the array of anxiety symptoms, all the array of depressive symptoms. It often leads to substance use disorders that are attempts by people who have the PTSD to medicate or treat themselves with substances that they hope will reduce their symptom profile. It's a relatively treatable problem. Treatment often requires a long time. A person who is going to go into a state of panic when they hear an airplane fly over obviously cannot sit for 10 days in a meditation hall with other people around them making noise or changing position, or people at night waking up and causing some subtle noises in the meditation center. So once again, it's the kind of situation where it isn't wise for a person in that state to take a meditation course, but it may become available to them at some other point in life. But that would be the kind of situation where we might want to say to someone, now's not the time for you to take a meditation course.
Mhm, mhm. And the last psychological challenge I'll ask you about is, which is quite common today, is ADD or ADHD.
Okay, a widely debated issue, and the debate around ADHD is two things. How do you define it accurately, and how accurately is this diagnosis being used? Is it being overused? Every little child who squirms a bit is told they have ADHD, or are we neglecting it and not diagnosing it enough? And people who would benefit from treatment when they're very young, and the treatment might help them a lot, are not getting that treatment because they're not being diagnosed. To stay away from those um, professional debates about the accuracy, the extent, and the usage in schools and in culture in general of these diagnoses, we can just say ADHD refers to a type of wiring in a person's mind and body that seems in many ways very wonderful. These are people who are more alert, more active, more physically active, more driven towards motor activity rather than sitting still. We might think of many kinds of athletic people similar to that. Um, but ADHD is described as a disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, in which these positive traits, these adaptations, these high energy, high motor skills, ways of living become a problem. So in the classic severe ADHD case, a person, say a young adult, maybe in high school, maybe in college, maybe similar years, but not in school, that person may have multiple broken relationships, multiple scrapes with the law, multiple instances of substance abuse, multiple problems with auto accidents, not being able to follow the law, driving too quickly, getting in accidents, getting tickets. So problems associated with overactivity. In itself, that's not a reason that a person can't take a meditation course, but it rests upon the degree of severity. If a person says, I can't sit still, why are they entering into a framework where for 10 days they'll be asked to sit still? It seems very maladaptive choice. So we should guide those people away from doing it, doing a meditation course. On the other hand, many people with ADHD can take a meditation course and will find that their ability to sit still, attend, and concentrate will be improved. So there's a judgment call in there, and that's why in all these cases, whether we're discussing anxiety, depression, PTSD, ADHD, we're discussing judgments where a experienced meditator, a meditation assistant teacher, or someone assigned to the job of assessing the applications of students to our courses is able to have a conversation, either live or via email, about whether it's relevant for the person suffering from this problem to take a meditation course at this point in time. And sometimes the judgment can be a little off. Sometimes the judgment can be helpful, but a certain degree of intelligent scrutiny and prudence is a wise thing to have applied to an application before a person takes a course.
Good, thank you. That's very helpful. So basically, I mean, with these illnesses, these challenges, you've been emphasizing that Vipassana shouldn't be seen as a replacement for conventional treatments for medical or emotional challenges, illnesses. So maybe we can go a little deeper in that. So can you discuss how some of the common misconceptions about meditation as a one size fits all, a cure all, and how can we approach meditation in a balanced and realistic way that complements rather than replaces conventional therapeutic modalities?
Meditation is intended to be a way of life. It's not intended to be a single event treatment. No one goes to a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a social worker, a therapist, and expects to see that helper every day for the rest of their life. But the goal of meditation for many people is to adopt a way of life in which one meditates every day for the rest of one's life. So a path that guides you in and out of the vicissitudes of living is different than something that's intended to cure one specific problem. In our tradition, the way this idea is metaphorized is the story that Goenkaji tells that when he applied for a meditation course, he was rejected. Incidentally, it's not just the Buddha who didn't accept all students to meditation, but Goenkaji's teacher, Uba Khin, did not accept all students. And he rejected Goenkaji because Goenkaji wanted to take meditation to cure a headache, that is, to use it as a treatment for migraine illness. And that's different than adopting meditation as a way of life. Of course, if a person wants to take a meditation course and has absolutely no conviction that they will maintain this for a way of life, no problem. Why not give it a try, see if it is something you want to maintain, or it isn't something you want to maintain. That's okay. But that's different than approaching meditation to treat a specific illness. It wasn't intended for that. It doesn't do that, and it's not offered for that purpose. What it does do, what it is intended for, and what it's offered for, is creating a pathway that follows a complex set of human rectifying events, such as meditation, such as the practice of moral vows, such as certain attitudes towards human relationships, and certain general attitudes towards life, which meditation increases and which are precursors. That is a vicious cycle or a positive cycle of attitudes, of values that meditation raises up in the mind and facilitates, and that are facilitated in meditation.
Good. Thank you. So we see in the past, you're talking about now, and historically, you mentioned how serious meditation practice was not dispensed indiscriminately. Do you know what were some of the traditional criteria for admission that functioned as a selective filter in the Buddha's time? And how did the spread of meditation in the second half of the 20th century lead to a loss of this discretion?
Well, I'll give two examples of criteria that Buddha used. The first one I've already referred to. It says in the text repeatedly that the Buddha would start some description of Dhamma, of the path of meditation, and as he would give his little talk, he'd be able to look at his audience who was listening to him and read their minds. Then he would decide how much further he should go, how complicated the description should get, how challenging or how simple the description should remain. So that was the main criteria that we cannot use, and that's the one that's referred to most often. And it implies that the Buddha had special skills in knowing what was relevant and not relevant. We can't use those. Another one that he used and we use is a strong belief, an unbreakably strong belief in the importance of religious ritual. In the Buddhist time, as is now, there were religions that emphasized ritual. That is to say, instead of feeling that a person's well-being rests upon moral conduct, psychological states of well-being, insight into one's own motives and behaviors, compassion and kindness towards others. Instead of those being emphasized, there were and are religions that emphasize do this set of behaviors. If you do this set of behaviors in the right way at the right time, the gods will like you and you're going to be in good shape. If you don't do these sets of behaviors, the gods will not like you and you're in trouble. We find those, for example, I'm just listening to the audio book of the Odyssey. That's very heavily stressed in Greek religion. And that was, let's say, vaguely in a similar era to the Buddha. And so we see that ritual religion existed in Greece and in India and still does today. That was considered by the Buddha an absolute contraindication to attending a meditation course or learning meditation, because the essence of meditation is not magical thinking about what will help you. It is instrumental thinking, becoming aware of cause and effect in your own life, discerning what causes you can put out into the world to make you happy. What causes, if you put them out into the world, you know are going to make you unhappy. So how to build a life that's intentional, self-examined, that is meditatively based. And that's the opposite of ritual religion. So that was considered a contraindication. And there are instances in the suttas where people say they listen to the Buddha, and they're ritualists, and the Buddha says, I will teach them only the first steps. I will not teach them meditation, because if they're continuing to use rituals, they will not be able to learn what I have to teach.
Mhm.
You asked me something more. You asked me, what are the uh,
And then, yeah, and then how did the spread of meditation in the second half of the 20th century lead to a loss of discretion?
well, meditation is hard to learn. One goes through a certain amount of difficulty, but overall, many, many people, millions of people, will find meditation to be just the very thing they were looking for in their life, something very upbeat, incredibly exciting when it's first adopted, very helpful year after year. So the enthusiasm that a large percent of meditative students find, that enthusiasm then goes out to people who know them, and they themselves may put out this enthusiasm, and a feeling that everybody should do this seems reasonable to people who feel, well, it's incredibly helpful. I'm an ordinary person, nothing special about me. I managed to get so many things cleared up in my life. I feel so much better because I'm a meditator. Why doesn't everybody do this? But as we've just been discussing, there are reasons why everybody should not do it. It's not for everybody every day of the year. So the enthusiasm of meditation first being known after it was known only to relatively culturally contained groups, and then suddenly exploding on the world stage with modern communications, most particularly the airplane, which enabled people to go to Asia, learn meditation, and then for meditation to spread as populations of new meditators spread it to new cultures. This came along with the enthusiasm and without the caution that had previously balanced each other out. That is, there should be enthusiasm, there also should be caution. And the enthusiasm swept away the caution.
Mm, I see. So following that, maybe we can explore some of the way guidelines have been developed. And in the essay, you explain that some of the contemporary guidelines in the Goenka tradition for screening psychological and psychiatric problems in the Vipassana courses derive really from two sources. The first is what you call experiential pragmatism, and the second you say comes from the psychological and medical sciences. Can you explain how these two distinct sources, the experiential pragmatism and the psychological and medical sciences, how have these sources contributed to shaping the current standards of care for students on the residential meditation courses?
As Goenkaji and then his appointed assistant teachers and teachers began teaching Vipassana on a worldwide basis, certain kinds of problems began to recur. And Goenkaji and his assistant teachers and teachers were able to identify certain things that might tend to be a problem. One example that I tell with a bit of humor, it's a little echo of how things were as recently as the 1980s. I remember going to India and getting a little pamphlet before the course. So even then, there was the idea, well, students need to be informed ahead of time what the course is about and what it's like, just in case they decide they don't want to take it, or if they need some uh, increased confidence that it's going to be worthwhile and a good thing to do. And the little pamphlet ended up by saying, um, this is not uh, a program, 10-day program, 10-day meditation course that is good for disgruntled misfits. I love that phrasing because it's such a comical juxtaposition of words, and it's not a way we think about people today. But it shows that um, people who are globally dissatisfied and unhappy, who can't find a way to structure their life at all to their well-being, are a little too behind the eight ball to benefit from a course that requires a certain amount of skill and ability just right after you show up. You do have to cooperate with the teacher. You do have to sit still for long periods of time. You do have to eat lunch at a certain time, eat breakfast at a certain time, eat the food that's offered and not the food you want. So a totally disgruntled misfit is not going to enjoy one of these courses and won't get any benefit out of it. That's an example of how, at the very beginning, as Vipassana was spreading around the world, it was possible for the teachers to identify certain kinds of problems. Today, we might, instead of saying disgruntled misfit, we might say chronically depressed or severely unhappy people. There's no reason to judge that person at all. That's a person who needs help, but meditation will not necessarily provide the help they're looking for. Then, when it became clear that certain people don't benefit from these courses and don't prosper, the question became, well, can we make more refined discernments about who this would be instead of using global and not very specifically definitive words like disgruntled misfit? Can we use more accurate words and more accurate phrasing to help people self-identify when they shouldn't take the course, and to help the assistant teachers who will be conducting the course identify ahead of time a person who might either require more help or might require help beyond what we can offer. And that required looking in to the way that modern concepts of psychological distress are organized and trying to create application forms that will help people self-identify and help teachers identify those people who won't prosper. So that required knowledge of the kinds of questions you were asking me earlier, Kory, like, well, are you depressed? Are you anxious? How severe is the depression? How severe is the anxiety? What are the triggers for it? You do have PTSD, you don't have PTSD. How severe is it? What trigger warnings will make you unable to meditate? Which ones you can meditate through? So it took years of developing skillful integration of meditation with our uh, general cultural knowledge of human distress to make increasingly excellent application forms and teacher trainings to help us properly discern who we can help and who we can't help.
Yeah, great. That's very helpful. That's clear. Um, just coming back, you mentioned the relationship to the suttas, and in your essay, you write that Goenkaji, and these are your words, did not want quotation, translation, interpretation, and disputation to alter or disrupt what had already been established as bedrocks to the teaching of his teacher, Uba Kin, close quote. So I'm curious, what do you think are the potential problems that scholarship could induce for a practice-based meditation tradition?
Well, our phrasings are slightly different. So I don't think scholarship introduces any problems per se. But if you have something called a tradition, that means that's a way of operating. So, for example, we offer 10-day courses, and then we also offer certain other kinds of Satipatthana course or a 20-day course or a 30-day course. We don't offer any 17-day course or 26-day course or 4-day course. So there's a way we have of operating. It's not absolutely perfect. Maybe somebody would benefit more by coming for 17 days because of their child's school holidays. They don't want to stay 20 days. And we're not against that, but we don't offer that. And in the same way, scholarship is, I think, a very positive thing. I can't imagine investing a large part of my life in Vipassana meditation and not going to the books that describe what it is and how it developed and where it came from and who developed it and how it changed and how the early sutta books differ from the later sutta books, etc. I can't imagine not reading about that, not trying to inform myself and make myself intelligently related to the cultural, literary, historical context in which it's embedded. But we can't have every person who comes to a meditation course say, well, I read page 10 of this particular translation of the suttas and it disagrees with what you do. They could be right. I'm not saying they're not right, but you can't have 1 million people come to meditation courses. We've had many more than 1 million. We've had millions, and each one say, well, I read the book and I disagree with the way you're doing it, so I want to do it a different way. Well, of course you can do it a different way, but we do it this way because we're a tradition embedded in these methods. Now, the methods to me that we're embedded in are impressively intelligent and skillful. And I think that's true for a couple of reasons. The people who are taking our tradition out from the suttas were people who had a double knowledge, and the double knowledge was sutta knowledge in Pali, not reading translations, and the second is meditation knowledge. They were meditating and gaining knowledge of meditation and using that knowledge to re-scrutinize the suttas they'd been learning in Pali, and those were the founding methods for our particular tradition, this dual background. Then another thing was how to format it for average people. It was a heavy tradition in Asia that only monastics actually meditated, and lay people were just supposed to practice these moral forms of conduct like being generous or being compassionate. So the actual meditation practice for lay people, the question was how to structure that. And once again, there was a lineage of teachers leading up to Goenkaji, including Goenkaji, that made certain course formats. They're not perfect. They're not the teaching of the Buddha at all. They're modern inventions. And once again, we can't have people come, 1 million people coming and saying, well, I want to do 9 3/4 days, or I, instead of listening to discourses in the evening, I want to listen to discourses at 1 p.m. There would be chaos. So there's a formatted way of understanding the suttas. There's a formatted way of linking sutta knowledge to meditation. And there's a formatted methodology for teaching this to lay people. That forms our tradition. So there's no problem at all with a scholarship. Quite the contrary. I would hope that anybody who gets serious about meditation would look into its scholarly background. But to imagine that every individual can come forward and proclaim themselves to be a critic and an elder who can transform a tradition that millions of people have already practiced, that's a pathway to anarchy and individual grandiosity, and obviously can't exist.
Good. Thank you. So in the psychological safety essay, and also in the mental health guidelines for assistant teachers, it's repeatedly emphasized that students must be able to cooperate, understand, and participate while on a 10-day course. Can you please elaborate on what it means to cooperate with the course teachers and the managers, what it means to understand the practice that's being taught, and what it means to follow the requirements for participation.
Sure. So we've come upon this now in two ways. And so what I'll say will follow upon two things we've already discussed. One thing is, well, we know that certain psychological patterns of mind can be incompatible with a 10-day course. And we've already discovered that. And so we want to inform applicants of that. And then people who come with those problems are the people who have, in the past, before they were wisely told not to attend the course, they would come and have problems with cooperation and participation. And I'll define that a little more in a second. And the second set of people who might have trouble with cooperation and participation are people who feel something like, well, I've read the suttas, and this may be where that unfortunate warning people off of reading and studying, something I consider remarkably incorrect for me as a reader and studier. But the origin of that critique may be people who come to a course and feel, well, I know what meditation is, and either I've read this scholarship, or I am a scholar, or I just feel I do know. How can they learn? It's that old saying that if your cup is already filled, how can we put new tea into it? So the two sources of difficulty, cooperating and participating, are people who are incapable of it. Their level of anxiety is too great. The trigger warnings of their PTSD are too great. Their level of depression is so crippling and discouraging that they don't have the energy to launch into learning something new. That's one kind of difficulty, cooperating, participating. And the other is a feeling that I don't want to learn from these people. I already know. I'm an expert. I know more. I've read it in a different book. I disagree with the interpretation. All those could be correct. Who knows? Maybe the people who disagree have a good point. But you can't run a course, and you can't have an algebra course in college and somebody says, I want to study Greek history in this course. Well, it's an algebra course. It's not a Greek history course. So people who come with the attitude, I don't want to do what's being taught. I want to do what I feel is correct. What's the point of taking the course? The difficulty when people don't cooperate and participate, however, is greater than the analogy I just made between going to college and insisting upon studying something that's not in the topic of the seminar you're actually taking. And that's because since meditation is something that stirs up our thoughts, feelings, emotions, if we're taking the course, sitting still day after day, and not meditating as we're being taught, different kinds of thoughts, feelings, etc., meditation experiences will rise up in that person, and the assistant teacher running the course, the teacher running the course, won't know how to deal with that person because what they're doing is not related to the meditation that's being taught. So that person who's doing something different than being taught is taking themselves out of the realm where they're accessible to the knowledge and skills of our tradition and its teachers and assistant teachers. So that's why the basic fundamental groundwork requires more cooperation and participation than you would have to do in an algebra course or a Greek history course. So occasionally people will say something like this. I took the Vipassana course, but I found there was people required me to cooperate and participate more than I wanted to do. To me, it seemed like they were trying to control me. And occasionally a negative word will be used like, well, these people are trying to brainwash me. But the answer is, this is a course that one joins voluntarily in order to learn. And the learning is a behavioral, emotional, cognitive learning. It's not just cognitive. It's not just information. It's what time you eat and what time you go to bed and what you listen to as a discourse and how you practice the meditation. So there is a controlling element. A person shouldn't take the course if they are not able to experience that level of control over their voluntary behavior. For example, what time you eat lunch, or what time you eat breakfast, or how many hours a day you meditate, or what the meditation instructions are. If you feel overly oppressed by such a circumstance, then a 10-day meditation course is not a good thing for you.
Good. That's helpful. Thank you. I'd like to return to the idea around risk and meditation. You write in the text, in the essay, meditation is not for everyone, but it is also as safe as any other serious enterprise, like going to college, getting married, or having children. Closed quote, sorry. Can you expand on these analogies that are used to illustrate the serious, valuable life activities are never risk-free, and what common psychological or physical challenge these activities may present?
I get a lot of discomfort being telegraphed back to me when I talk about these things. So here goes. But these are difficult things to say, but are important things to think about, whether one's a meditator or not. One of the great advances that all of us who live in contemporary developed societies have, one of the great advantages is a relatively higher level of security. For example, we now live to be nearly 80 years old on average. And that's true even in relative developing nations. The length of life is longer, and the length of healthy life is longer. So we've diminished the amount of suffering from disease, and we have greater security and comfort. And that's true across many variables. I just picked health. It's also true of mental health to some degree. It's also true of economic well-being to some degree. Mostly, fear of hunger has been less in many, many people's lives due to developed societies. However, no society can eliminate risk, and there's risk in every life, and every life eventually faces some traumatic difficulties, at the very least, death. But almost all people face some illnesses, physical, maybe even mental, and almost all people face many series of difficult life situations to solve. So risk is never eliminated from life. It's a part of life, and in contemporary societies, we often feel offended when the concept of risk is applied to activities that we feel we should be able to pursue without any risk. And that is one of the myths of modern society that my commentary today and any thoughtful look around you should dispel. For example, driving a car. Driving a car is an extremely dangerous thing to do. Depending on the year and the way the statistics are collected, in the United States we have, say, between 30 to 50,000 deaths a year, and have had that year after year after year. If we take the middle statistic, say 40,000 deaths a year due to auto accidents, over 10 years, that's 400,000. Over a lifetime, over my lifetime, millions of Americans have been killed in auto accidents. And yet everybody drives, in America, almost everybody drives almost every day. So there is risk in daily life. And what we do is deny it. I deny it. When I get in my car, I don't feel I'm facing death. I feel quite confident that I'll be fine. And that's quite irrational. Furthermore, the death statistic that there are millions of Americans who have been killed by auto accidents in my life during the course of my lifetime, that is actually a minimal statement about the trauma that auto accidents induce, because most people in auto accidents don't die. They just have crushed pelvises or uh, concussions, or other horrible life damaging events. And these happen in the hundreds of thousands. And over the course of my lifetime, they've happened in the millions upon millions. So there's risk in our modern world, which we deny. Now, many of the very best things in life have risk. And this is surprising to some of our modern people. For example, marriage is very risky. In America, we say roughly half of marriages end in divorce, and many divorces are traumatizing to either one or both people getting divorced. So if 50% of people are getting divorced, and divorce can be traumatic, marriage is exposing many people to very upsetting life circumstances. Most people know that. There's less denial around that than auto accidents. And people know when they're getting married, the day they get married, most people are anxious. Good. They should be anxious. Yeah. So another one is childbirth. Childbirth is much safer than it used to be. One of the things that you could say, civilization, whatever that is, if you believe there is something called civilization, one way to define it would be women don't die in childbirth regularly. It's now occasional. But just in the past year or two, there have been reviews of maternal death at childbirth. It still happens. It used to happen frequently. Now it happens rarely, but it still happens. And in a nation of hundreds of millions of people, it does happen quite recurrently, though statistically rarely. So giving birth is dangerous. Driving a car is dangerous. And almost everything we do is dangerous. I spent a few years as a psychiatrist at colleges. College is very risky. The first year of college is a high risk year of life, and it leads to many very upset people. But we don't tell people they shouldn't go to college, even though college is quite risky. College also, by the way, leads to a higher rate of suicide. And suicide on college campuses is approximately 1,000 per year. Wow. If that were a war, we'd be calling our troops home.
Yeah.
So when people say, what is the risk attached to meditation? It's not easy. We don't have a statistic on that because, as I said, you'd have to know how many people who start the course are already anxious, depressed, have PTSD to a greater or lesser degree. To what degree? How does that compare to people of the same degree who didn't take a meditation course? Are the courses raising or lowering these illnesses? We don't have research like that. We're a voluntary traditional group following a tradition rather than a scientific model. So we can't answer all those questions, but we can say there's no serious life commitment that is entirely free of risk. And when a person becomes a meditator, as we've discussed, there are some times where meditation can bring up unsettling emotions, thoughts, feelings, behavioral reactions, just as marriage can, just as childbirth can, just as going to college can. One time when I presented this idea to a group of Vipassana assistant teachers who are very astute listeners, they made the distinction to me, well, things like going to college is years long, and marriage is, you hope, years long. But a Vipassana course is only 10 days, so you shouldn't use an analogy of things that take years to cause mental benefit or mental distress when you're discussing meditation. But there are many instances of things that produce wonderful results in a short period of time. To me, speaking personally, one of those would be canoeing. I used to be a very involved expedition canoeist. I loved canoeing. And many people have exhilarating, life transforming experiences when they're paddling canoes, specifically through the north woods of Canada, which are so beautiful, so filled with wildlife. People have emotions. I had emotions that guide your life for the rest of your life. What a wonderful thing. But canoeing has plenty of risks. And if you look at the statistics, for example, in Canada, you see a regular rate of people who drown while they're on canoe trips or kayaking trips. There's nothing free of risk. It's very unreasonable to expect to engage in any serious activity like going to college, getting married, having children, driving a car, and not factor in the fact that to some degree one has to be making a discernment about what the benefit is, what the risk is, and whether the activity is worth it for you. I take the risk. I used to take the risk when I was younger of going canoeing. I never drowned. I'm glad I canoed, but some people have drowned.
So all these activities are not risk-free. Marriage, going to college, meditation. But just like you said earlier, meditation doesn't cause specific forms of mental illness. I guess we could say that marriage or going to college doesn't create certain forms of mental illness specific to those activities.
Right. I worked up here very briefly and very, very many years ago at the University of Massachusetts, up a couple of streets from me. And uh, there's a student health service that even then, so many years ago, decades ago, was at that point already so busy the poor students could hardly get a chance to see somebody to help them. And today it's so much busier and so much more stressful to be a young adult. And in those cases, there would be people with every single possible form of psychiatric disorder in the college classes and particularly in the freshman year. But no one would say there's a disease called the University of Massachusetts disease. The disease is not where it happens. The disease is the patterns of neuromental psychosocial changes that are occurring in that individual person. So, for example, a student might be depressed. A student might be having panic. A student might be having a recurrence of PTSD caused by their military service before they went to college or caused by a rape that happened before they went to college. And students may also have more severe patterns of mental illness, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. But no one calls bipolar disorder that happens in your freshman year at the University of Massachusetts bipolar disorder. It's just bipolar disorder. So if people have these kinds of problems and come to a meditation course and leave the course with those problems, the problems are not caused by meditation. They're the well-known, well-described patterns of mental distress that occurred while a person was meditating or reoccurred or came to the surface.
Mhm. So what I'm understanding is the mental experience or mental states are already present in people's minds before these activities. So I'm wondering how an observation-based practice like Vipassana can bring up previously latent psychological content to the forefront of our awareness, and how or why this might actually be misconstrued as being caused by meditation or caused by going to college or caused by canoeing.
Yeah, a couple of examples that I remember being so impressed when I was reading about how the Dutch invented lenses that could be used to examine drops of water. And when they did this, they found this thing that no one was willing to accept at the time, which is inside a drop of water, there's little creatures living in it. The first time you hear that, it's quite disgusting. I always thought water was pure. And some water may be pure, of course, but our common drinking water, particularly in 1600, had little animalcules in it called amoebas and other things. And then some of them were disease causing and some of them were not. But the lens does not cause the amoeba. The amoeba is there. The lens helps you see it. A similar example, I used to love to listen to birds and watch birds. When you go into the woods, you see and hear some birds. But when you go into the woods with an expert, you see and hear more birds. The expert does not cause more birds. The expert helps you to see more birds are there than you would have noticed without his or her help. When we take a Vipassana course, we're sitting still day after day, attending to our sensations on our body, and the mind is also active. And as our mind contacts our body, there's information stored in our body sensations that comes to the surface of our mind because we're tapping into that information state that's coded in our body. I mean, that's true a millionfold. That's true every moment of every day. But if we take a classic example from a meditation course, say one stereotype example for meditation course, maybe the first course I had an experience which many people had. As my mind was moving through my body, I remember it, startlingly remembered with vivid clarity, something I may have completely forgotten or almost completely forgotten, that in a particular shoulder I had once been impacted, hurt and hit, and that it had induced pain in that shoulder. The pain had long since gone away, I thought, but when I meditated, that pain was still encoded in my body at that particular site. And when my mind went to that particular site with the stillness and clarity that meditation was inducing to examine that site's sensations so much more vigorously and clearly due to meditation, then I experienced that pain again. Even though I must have felt my shoulder 1,000,000,000 times for many years and never experienced the pain because I wasn't observing with the intensity and clarity. The man looks at the drop of water and sees nothing. He takes a lens, he looks at the drops of water, he sees the amoeba. The student lives a life and doesn't experience much about their mind and body. They go to a meditation course, and with the new lens, the new world of realization opens up, and it includes beautiful, euphoric, exciting, happy emotions, and it includes unpleasant, unhappy emotions that have been repressed, pushed aside, denied, not paid attention to, and now the lens is showing them to be there still.
Good. So during meditation, you write that the practitioner is both the observer and the observed. Can you please clarify what you mean by this observer observed dichotomy?
Almost all the time, we use our sensorium to scan the environment to give us information about what our next thought or move should be. Originally, we were hunter-gatherer peoples. We were living outdoors without buildings, and we needed to be alert to the world. And our attention was set upon, is a lion going to eat me? Where can I find some lichens for lunch? How will I stay dry if it starts to rain? And this external observation of the universe around us, auditorily, visually, etc., motorically, became the dominant mode for human adaptation. Meditation reverses that. We use our sensorium inwardly. We try to feel the sensations of our body directly in the state of feeling sensations without external reference or observation. So we're turning our attention inward. We're turning off our externally aroused sensorium like vision, like audition, and we're turning inward to experience ourselves directly from within. We are observing and we are the observed. That's a rare opportunity not provided by ordinary life at all. So meditation adds, it's like going into a new universe. We've been looking at the visual, auditory, motorically accessible, tactile, accessibly universe. And in meditation, we're entering a different aspect of the universe that we haven't really dipped into before. So an awakening opportunity.
Mhm. Good, thank you. So I'd like to just come back to this notion of risks in meditation, because in the essay you described four categories of events that might make meditation, especially a rigorous 10-day course, intensive course, that these categories might make it very unhelpful for an individual. So I think it would be good if we can expound upon each of these categories and illustrate how they might manifest for a student. So the first category consists of environmental conditions of a residential course. So it would be nice if you could describe the conditions of a course and why some people might find these conditions particularly challenging.
The way a meditation course is set up in our tradition, and we discussed how our tradition arrived at the forms that it uses through the experiences of master teachers, mostly in the 20th century. These conditions are set up to optimize the capacity of non-meditators, that means lay people living in any hemisphere of the world, Western hemisphere included, non-meditators, to reverse their normal patterns of daily activity, to turn inward psychologically and psychophysically, how our sensorium is aware, and to meditate in a relatively uninterrupted way. So the conditions are relatively turning off the world. Literally, you turn off things like cell phones and televisions and radios, uh, but you also turn off your vision to some degree as you're meditating. You close your eyes. And the entire situation of the course emphasizes stillness, quiet, solitude, not in the sense that you're not alone, but solitude in the sense that you're meditating in your own mind and body, and you're not paying attention to other people, and no one else is paying attention to you. These conditions are experienced by many people as soon as they start their first meditation course to be the heaven they were looking for. There's no cell phone interrupting them. I I have this particular disfavor of trying to write something, concentrating so hard and trying to get the sentences out, and suddenly a cell phone is disrupting something, a sentence I've been working on for minutes, and the cell phone goes off and the whole thought is lost to me.
Mm.
Modern world is so intrusive, annoying, domineering, invasive, attention requiring all the time. So a meditation course is a kind of heaven for people like me and millions of other people. But there could be a negative reaction to that. Someone might say, well, I want to know if my child who is coughing had strep throat or not. What did the hospital test say? I can't get my cell phone. I don't know if my kid had strep or not. So there are many people who will feel more anxious by being cut off from the typical routine that has kept them aloft during their daily life. They've come to the course to get away from that routine, but when they get away from it, they realize, whoops, I want to be in touch with my daily world. I feel cut off. I don't feel comfortable. I feel, you say, separation anxiety. You say the anxiety of uncertainty and unknowing. You say loss to the people who support you on a daily basis. And so the conditions of a course, benign and wonderful as they can be to the average person like me, they can also be negative to some people.
Good. And the second category is the potential or likely upwelling of memories, thoughts, and feelings. How can a surge of these mental events be overly demanding for some students?
So this goes back to when we were discussing different kinds of mental contexts that we all harbor, that image of we have a lens, and for the first time we look in the drop of water and what do we see? And depends on what is in that drop of water. So if that drop of water, now if it comes out of a tap, I never drink water from the tap directly. It's got some chemicals that are meant to kill life. You won't find drops of water, instead you'll find chlorine. So in that drop, you won't see anything. But if you have a natural drop of water, you see things that are there. Some of the things you don't want to see. Maybe there's an amoeba with amoebic dysentery in it. So people have in their minds and bodies, as they begin to meditate, the history of their life. And some people have had very bad life history that may rise up and be highly distressing, more distressing than meditation can account for. So in meditation, for the average person, many different difficult thoughts and feelings come up, but the whole art of meditation is the art of learning equanimity with the stuff that's inside of me. Equanimity with the distress in my body, equanimity with the distress in my mind. Ironically, this is a hard thing for new students to learn, equanimity with the well-being. Sometimes the well-being and euphorias of life are the most addicting and misleading things we have inside of us. So we're learning equanimity with the sensations that are going on in our mind-body complex, but some persons will have such a strong bad memory, let's say a memory of rape, let's say a memory of child abuse. These may not be amenable to the tools that the meditation course offers for developing equanimity. The strength of that past experience is too powerful. We hope that we learn about those things before students attend the courses through our screening process. But sometimes people don't actually know all that's inside of them and may be there on the course and find this very difficult thing going on inside them. Hopefully they and their teacher can talk about it and get special attention applied to how to deal with it. But still, people can be distressed by what they discover.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is quite common. The third type of challenge that some meditators face on courses is altered mental processes and dysregulated moods. So what are the challenges that arise with those mental processes that are altered and dysregulated moods?
This would be something we would hope happens very rarely. We would hope that our screening processes would call our attention and the attention of the applying student to these problems before they come to the course. People who have these problems, it tends to be recurrent. It doesn't just happen suddenly when you're 28 years old for the first time, or suddenly when you're 50 for the first time. It tends to start happening in youth and to continue as a difficult aspect of that person's life. These are people whose the content of the mind is not all that alters. It's not just that they remember something that was difficult. It's that the way their mind works alters. An example, when people have emotional disorders, they may be perfectly in the middle path, and then suddenly they may alter into a very excited state, a high, a hypomania, a mania. And in that altered state of mind, it's not just that they think differently, they do think differently, but they think with an entirely different mental state going on, possibly very rapidly racing thoughts, thoughts that are unstoppable, thoughts that continue down a path hour after hour, day after day without stopping. Such a mental state obstructs meditation, cannot be contained by meditation, and a person with that problem should not come to a 10-day meditation course. They should know that ahead of time. We should be responsible enough to let them know ahead of time. There are alterations like I just described, there are the opposite alterations. People may become very sluggish, very slowed down, no thoughts, inability to have thoughts, uh, very suddenly depressive attitudes and feelings that suddenly switch on. A person with a dis a mood disorder that shifts downward so abruptly and seriously will not benefit from a meditation course, because when you're meditating, you do need to be able to call up mental processes like concentration and awareness. If you can't concentrate and be aware, meditation is lost to you. You won't be able to do it. Its benefits will not come to you. So people
Hmm.
with that kind of problem should be told meditation will be helpful for you, and they should know that ahead of time. Um, so those would be two examples. There may be many, many more. Delusional thinking, a person who just sits there and rolls in fantasies about a war between beings in outer space, is not going to be able to concentrate on the hardcore nitty gritty reality that meditation is about. By hardcore nitty gritty reality, I mean the sensations of your body.
Yeah, and you mentioned some like a very rapid mind, unceasing thoughts, sort of a motor mind of thoughts. Sometimes people who have that come to the course hoping to just cut that off and even move to a state of no thoughts, which you also just described as possibly problematic. Yeah. And then the last category, which you kind of addressed in the first one, is that some students find the paucity, the lack of social support to be troublesome, and it can increase their sense of isolation and vulnerability. Is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Sure. A meditation course is, you could describe it in two opposite ways. It's extremely nurturing. It's a lovely, wonderful place to be. Many, many people will take one course, and after that, they know, well, every year, the rest of my life, I hope I have the chance to take another one of these courses. They're just, I feel embedded in something so good, so helpful. I love them. I want to keep doing them. And that's because you're surrounded by a group of people who don't pester you, who don't talk to you, who don't annoy you, but who are all there for this idealistic, benign, wonderful ideal of a fine way of being a human being, being a meditator, being on the path of Dhamma, of truth seeking, of compassionate, good living. So, what a wonderful place to be. And everyone around you sharing this goal with you. And you're getting home cooked food, and uh, a lot of people managing the course, shuffling around you, making sure you've got the toothpaste or the slippers that you forgot, a environment set up to take care of you. But it's so pleasant because you're not supposed to talk to other people, can't turn on your iPhone, can't make a telephone call to find out how your sick family member is doing over the past 6 days when you've been in silence on the sixth day of the course. And so you're cut off. And that cutting off can feel very deprivational. I used the word controlling earlier. People can feel, hey, I'm being controlled. I want to pick up my cell phone and find out whether my mother did or didn't recover from that broken leg. And I can't call her. And these people are stopping me from calling her. I never want to face this kind of external control of my behavior again. I don't like this course at all. So some people will experience what is set up to be benign and meditative as not benign and controlling. And so there'll be different reactions in people, some of whom will not like a meditation course.
Hmm. And sometimes people have very mixed responses. This aspect of isolation and being cut off from the outside world is what they appreciate the most. And at the same time, it's the hardest part of the course for them.
Yeah,
They're
excellent.
experiencing two contradictory or
Right.
conflicting. emotions at the same time.
Right. So, and as the days of the course evolve, they'll be experiencing both of them in alternating, uh, uh, sort of mind-boggling difference. I love this course. It's so great. I never want to leave it. Geez, I hate this thing. I can't wait till it's over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the last concept or the last theme I would like to talk about with you today is this dark night of the soul meme. So as you know, the phrase dark night of the soul is a concept attributed to the 16th century Spanish Catholic monk, Saint John of the Cross. And this meme has become very popular amongst online meditation commentators to describe a specific meditation insight related to suffering. But in its original context, however, the idiom describes a spiritual period of profound inner turmoil, confusion, and a loss of connection with the divine. And paradoxically, it's seen as an essential phase on the path to spiritual union with God, where the soul is purified through intense suffering and dissociation. But when reconceptualized in modern meditation circles, it's often likened to the stage of insight, which Buddhaghosa, the 5th century Theravadan Buddhist commentator, translator, and philosopher, referred to as the dukkha jnana, the insight knowledge of suffering. And we see many online opinions view this dukkha jnana as an experience of intense existential anxiety, an experience of hopelessness, isolation. But I'm not sure this is entirely accurate. In my mind, it's not simply an awareness of it, but it's really a mature perception into the First Noble Truth that dukkha, right, suffering, dissatisfaction, discontentment, it exists and it's inevitable. So I'm not sure that severe existential angst or distress is needed to pass through this stage. So I have many questions about this trend. We'll only stick to three or four briefly. But what problems might arise when using a medieval Catholic concept that values purifying the soul through self-mortification, through self-torture, to modern Vipassana meditation aimed at the cultivation of equanimity?
Okay. Well, uh, you gave a nice little discourse on it already, Kory. So I'll just be following up on what you said. So,
Yeah.
uh, Saint John of the Cross is his fame. He's famous as a great writer, great poet, but he's also famous as a Catholic mystic and a saint. He was sainted, canonized, and he lived in about 500 years ago. And we've been discussing how much more secure and safe our life is today. So he grew up in an environment where his father died when he was an infant. He had a brother who starved to death. Imagine how poor they were, how destitute they were. And his mother was unable to take care of him and put him in an orphanary run by a monastery. So he grew up in a monastery at first as an orphan, then he ordained. And he lived in a world where people would whip themselves, which he did. When people were whipped in public to punish them or humiliate them, which happened to him, he often lacked food and warmth. He had a very hard life. Very few people today have lives that hard. I don't see any point in imagining that when we meditate, we will have experiences analogous to being whipped in public or to flagellating ourselves till we're bleeding in order to induce states of altered consciousness. There's no analogy and nothing like that happening to our modern meditators by the millions. Of millions of people, few or none will be analogous to St. John. And so the relevance of his philosophical musings as poetry, as philosophy, is one thing. but their relevance as a guide to what will actually happen to us when we meditate is a completely different thing. We're very unlikely to get from his writing a proper chart of what's going to happen to us in our meditative experiences. Furthermore, there are a number of other important things. Maybe I'm anticipating some questions you have. St. John of the Cross was heavily invested. I mean, his whole life he was a Catholic monk, and he's been affirmed as a saint. So he was invested in a belief in the soul, and the focus of his life was for his soul to attain union with God. But that has nothing to do with anything we do when we meditate. We don't look to have a soul. In Buddhism, it's considered there is no soul, whether an individual thinks they have a soul or don't think they have a soul. In either case, it's not called up as part of our meditation. Mm. And there's no God in our meditation to have union with. So the whole matrix of St. John's theological background is entirely either irrelevant or misleading as a commentary upon our contemporary meditation practices. Most importantly, I would say, is the idea that you've already referred to, Kory, so I'm just going to echo what you said. The concept of dukkha in Buddhism, of dissatisfaction or suffering, is a reference to something that's existential. That is, we all have it. It is present in us. You don't need to be whipped to feel it. You don't need to be starved to feel it. You don't need to be intensely anxious to feel it. It's part of every moment of daily life. There's an awareness at some level, somewhere in our body, that things are changing and eventually will change so much that we will cease to exist. And as they change, there will be distressing states of mind and body, which we'll have to encounter, and which we can encounter with more or less skill, more or less equanimity. That's a teaching of the Buddha. It has nothing to do with augmented extremities of distress. It has to do with the distress of every day, of every moment. And so dukkha is omnipresent in life if we're not enlightened, which most of us are not, and it is present in the magnitude of our daily experience, and that's where we seek to rectify it through developing equanimity on the path to enlightenment that removes us from being haunted by this dukkha. So putting us into extreme states is both unnecessary and not on the path.
Mm-hmm. So when focusing on the suffering as a necessary and perhaps desirable state to be experienced, what risk is there of spiritualizing a mental health crisis?
Yeah, I think the language that lauds a dark night of the soul as being on the path to fusion with God, that's fine for people who are not meditators, but meditation has nothing to do with that. And the danger of applying that kind of language to meditation is if one of those circumstances arises of the kind we were discussing earlier, or a person, let's say, has anxiety disorder, but they come to a meditation course and they experience anxiety disorder while they're on the meditation course, or they don't have an anxiety disorder, but while they're on the meditation course, they remember something that they haven't wanted to think about, pushed aside, say that they were raped. Suddenly, this recurs on their mind and intense anxiety and distress comes up with it. To romanticize it and say, this is a wonderful dark night of the soul, is the wrong attitude. The right attitude is, this is suffering. There's a way out of suffering. There's a pathway of learning how to observe your sensations, getting your mind away from being entranced by the visual imagery of the rape, learning to be inside your body sensations, hoping to cultivate some equanimity with those sensations, hoping to be able to re-engage this memory with a full presence of equanimity. That hope, that effort, that's meditation. It's not romanticizing suffering as a wonderful thing in itself. The Buddha explicitly was against the inducement of suffering. An explicit statement at the founding moments of the preaching of Dhamma was suffering does not need to be induced. It's always there already and in the right quantity for each one of us in our own body.
Hmm. Yeah. I've seen students come to courses because they've wanted to put themselves in a very challenging situation. Maybe the course was right for them or not right for them, but they saw the experience as an experience of suffering. And even though it's not designed that way, but some people might interpret it that way. And so I guess that's really not an appropriate uh, motivation for coming to a course to put oneself through that kind of suffering. Um, is there any danger of pathologizing a spiritual experience that might involve distress?
Sure. So one day, here we're talking about, we had that little conversation earlier about scholarship, and in that conversation we were kind of pointing the word scholarship towards, say, Buddhist scholarship, study of suttas, study of Pali, etc. And I was saying nothing wrong with scholarship, depends how it's used. If it's used to make you feel so all-knowing that you can't learn anything new, then that's not helpful. But if it's used to help you learn, sounds good. That's what I do. So in the same way, we can talk about Western scholarship, scholarship about psychology, scholarship about what different mental states mean. If a person is going to a meditation course to label themselves with different diagnostic labels and they're not a mental health professional, or even if they are, they're just working with themselves, not with the uh, objectivity or relative objectivity for working with another person, then they can be using these labels misappropriately to either scare themselves. Oh my God, I'm having severe panic disorder, when one moment of panic or 1 hour of panic or 1 day of panic is a totally normal human experience. So you can over pathologize something, call it a disorder when it's mere experience. And
Mhm.
you can under pathologize it. You say, well, it's a dark night of the soul. It's just wonderful that I'm inducing myself to feel so horrible, which is not the goal. The goal of meditation is to feel better.
Mhm. Mhm. And when distress does arise, psychological distress, is more meditation the best response to it, to keep meditating? And if not, when is medical support needed instead?
Sure. That's why we have teachers. So a self course, a course without a teacher, is something for an advanced student, not really uh, a common thing, but something that some people do later on in their practice. But uh, we always always encourage a person taking first course, many courses with a teacher. So in that moment, the question will be, in that moment, let's say of a strong emotion coming up, let's say a bad memory is coming up, or uh, a chain of bad memories is coming up, and then the question is, we're not going to label it using psychology, we're not going to label it using uh, Pali scholarship. We're going to get to the point of what is going on with this individual person, and that should be through a dialogue with a skillful meditator called a meditation assistant teacher or teacher, who by definition is someone who's meditated for years and years and years, taken many, many meditation courses, and probably passed through the exact same thing. As we commonly share, uh, whenever I would have a student telling me some very difficult thing, almost always the first thing I would feel and I would say to them is, oh yeah, I've been through that too. Because most of the things we go through in common. They're common human experiences. So the discernment, how to work with it, should be done in dialogue with this skillful meditator called a teacher. Very often the answer is just keep working exactly as you are. What you're doing is totally correct. And now you're going to gain skills in working with this state. That's the commonest. But sometimes the answer is work differently than you've been working. Meditate more, meditate less, meditate sitting down. Don't meditate sitting down. Take a walk, take more walks, take fewer walks. Meditate with your eyes open. Don't meditate with your eyes open. The skillful use of different aspects of meditation that are not garden variety, that are applied to this more difficult situation. Finally, there could be cases where the answer is this seems like something beyond what meditation can help you deal with. Probably it's a wise thing to get professional help with this. That would be a rarer response.
Hmm. And just following from the last question, and I promise this will be the last question for the day. Can you discuss the critical distinctions between meditation and psychotherapy?
Sure. Psychotherapy is uh, not meditation and not similar to meditation. It's a beautiful, wonderful thing that we have in our culture, and it's not to be confused with meditation. Let's look at the difference. Meditation's goal is a lifetime path. Psychotherapy's goal is to do it and get done with it, even if it takes many years, even if it's a 5 or 10 year psychotherapy, as opposed to a 5 or 10 week psychotherapy. Still, its goal is termination. The goal of meditation is never to terminate. And in the metaphors of the ancient world, we'd say one doesn't terminate meditation even when one dies, and the next life one meditates again. A metaphor for not wanting it to stop, not seeing it as something that's supposed to terminate. Then um, psychotherapy is done in the context of a paid professional relationship. It's paid. That's very important because it says the relationship between the therapist and the person who's in therapy is is controlled by professional ethics and professional behavior. It's not a cozy friendship. It's got limits and boundaries. The hours that you meet, when you meet, how long you meet, how often you meet is all professionally designed. Meditation doesn't have all that structure of the relationship between a teacher and a student. Therefore, the teacher and student relationship is not intended to be the essence of meditation. The essence of meditation is to attain freedom from needing that teacher and being able to meditate without much or any feedback from teachers at all. So the goal of meditation is to end dependence and to continue forever. Whereas the goal of psychotherapy is to have a certain degree of structurally controlled dependence and then to terminate it in the future. The use of money in therapy is a critical definition of the therapy, helps the people know what their relationship is about. It's commercial and transactional, hopefully in a very healthy and benign way. In meditation, there is no financial transaction at all. It's purely passing along lines, we could say, of kindness, compassion, care, generosity, giving away what the teacher has gotten, giving it back to someone else. So those are all core differences. Finally, psychotherapy occurs in a certain conceptual context. People are seen and understood from the standpoint of modern Western psychology. Meditation doesn't have the same conceptual way of thinking about people, and its organizing thought processes and analyses are related to concepts that you've used in this conversation, things like nibbana or the path or moral vows, etc.
Great. That's very nice, very helpful. So we will stop there, and we will continue with this very important topic next time. And I wish everybody who's been listening today to have a wonderful day. Bye. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Kory.
Thank you so much, Paul and Kory, for joining us today. On behalf of Pariyatti, I'd like to thank you all for attending this event. When you leave this meeting, you'll be presented with an opportunity to fill out a short post-event survey. The link to the same survey will be posted in the Zoom chat box. If you have a few moments, we would appreciate your feedback. Thank you.